All right, well, good morning, everybody. Sorry about the chalkboard. It's, yeah, less than ideal. Anything that is totally illegible there? No? Is it pretty clear? Right? Achaemenid Empire, Cyrus the Great, Nabonidus of Babylon, Croesus of Lydia, Cambyses, Darius, dates, all that. Okay, cool. Yeah, if any of it looks unclear, do let me know. And we'll be going through these guys today. But before we do that, I wanted to say a few words about the final. Some of you guys have been asking me about the final. Again, that's on May 14th. So we have quite a bit of time before the final. During those dead weeks, I'm going to be available. I'll be posting office hours on BSpace, so you guys can come and ask questions if you need to. I'll probably have an informal review, sort of a drop-in review that you guys can come in and take part in if you want. And the layout of the final is going to be very similar to the midterm. There are going to be 3 parts to it. First part, there are going to be 5 IDs, and you'll have choice, again, in those IDs, just like the midterm, focusing on the who, what, where, when, and why. 5 slides, so there'll be 2 more slides than the midterm. Same sort of format. Rather, there you want the who, what, where, when, and why. With the IDs, we're looking for a short definition of 1 or 2 sentences. And then instead of 2 essays, 3 essays. And you'll have choice in regard to those as well. And the midterm is designed to, take about 2 hours. So you'll have 3 hours to complete it, but it's about a 2-hour midterm. And it should be pretty straightforward. The material, a lot of it's going to come from the second half of the class. But you still are going to be drawing on the first half in terms of some of those themes and motifs we've been talking about, issues of kingship, temples, palaces, art, and iconography. So, if you're talking about the significance of a slide, say during the Neo-Assyrian period, and there are parallels, you're talking about Sargon, right? Sargon II. You probably want to talk about Sargon I and the comparisons between these 2 leaders and why that's important. So again, check out the review sheet and come and talk to either Tony or I about any questions you might have. And do bring a blue book that day as well. But again, it should be pretty straightforward, and I'm not too worried about you guys. Any questions about the final? No? Okay. All right. Well, we're going to be continuing on today, picking up where we left off last time. Last time we talked quite a bit about the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II and Nebuchadnezzar II's attitude towards some of the people that were under his control, particularly to the far west, the sacking of Jerusalem, and we talked about the kings of Judea and Israel and the history of the Babylonian exile in relation to the Babylonians. We also looked at the way that archaeology of this period is tied to national identity, religious identity plays a very important part in the politics of what still remains a very troubled region. So actually what I did, I put 3 websites up on the board over here. One's for the city of David, which we talked about. The other is a website, altarch.org, which deals with another view of the same site, but from the Palestinian perspective, from the Palestinian residents of Silwan and how they interpret the site. So 2 very, very different interpretations of the same site. And the final one is an organization that I work with. It's arcshare.org. It's a group that works in Israel and uses archaeology as a way to create dialogue in the Israel-Palestinian conflict. So we actually bring young Israelis and Palestinians on digs and get a collective sort of process of interpreting the past in motion. Talk about the past, but also the present. So do check those out if you're interested in this topic. I thought I'd give those to you since we talked about it last time. So, picking up with the Neo-Babylonian Empire, we looked at Nabopolassar, we looked at Nebuchadnezzar II, and we talked about how Nabopolassar allied with a group of people known as the Medes in order to sack Nineveh in 612 BCE and bring an end to the Neo-Assyrian Empire. And we talked about, there were very good reasons for the Babylonians, of course, to be very anti-Assyrian, right? It was the Assyrians who ended up actually sacking Babylon and carting off the gods from the temple. But who are these Medes? Who are these Medes that the Babylonians allied themselves with? Well, we find them in Assyrian sources around the 9th century BCE. And they appear to have been at that time a group of divided tribes and individual kings of cities. In the late 7th century, we see they end up uniting and inherit the Urartian state up in the north. And we looked at Urartu about a week ago now. So they take over Urartu and eventually control a vast empire that stretches all the way from the Anatolian Peninsula here, the Halys River, all the way as far east as northeastern Iran. And again, we know quite a bit about the Medes from Assyrian sources, from Babylonian sources, and also Greek sources like Herodotus. Unfortunately, archaeologically, when it comes to art and architecture, there's not very much that we know. We know again that these sources that talk about them being very culturally diverse, a confederation of different tribes and peoples, that seems to play out in the art and architecture as well. We find, for example, similarities at the site of Hassanlu with their capital at Hamdan. I lighted the capital here. Hamdan actually remains unexcavated, so we don't have a lot of material from the Median capital, but we can see, again, comparisons with one of the excavated sites, a site called Tepe Nushijan in Iran. This is a Median site that was actually excavated again by David Stronach here in the Near Eastern Studies Department. And we find a lot of parallels with earlier Urartian architecture at sites like Hassanlu. We looked at the burn strata at Hassanlu. And when we compare it to Tepe Nushijan, these two complexes are very, very similar. In the case of Tepe Nushijan, it appears that what we're dealing with is a religious center of the Medes, perhaps linked to fire worship, as there was a tremendous amount of burned material surrounding the central temple. It's thought that maybe fire was part of their rituals, or fire was worshipped, similar to later Zoroastrians. This central temple has a stepped plan with an altar in the center. So you can see it's a very specific and unique structure. Later, between the Western Temple and the Central Temple, we see the construction of a large columned hall with 3 rows of 4 columns each. And again, this columned hall is something that we haven't seen very much of in our architecture of the ancient Near East. We've looked at things like the Bet Halani, columned porticos, but large columned halls are more typical of Egypt during this period than the ancient Near East. So really this is a kind of a step in this very regional tradition, right? Hassanlu and Tepe Nushijan are close to one another. So the Medes are building in a very similar way to the Urartians who they took over. And this will actually later on influence a lot of the architecture that we see in the Achaemenid Empire. So we'll get to sites like Pasargadae, Persepolis, and Susa. So remember, again, starting with the Urartians at Hassanlu, columned architecture leading to Tepe Nushijan, and then we'll continue to look at the use of columned halls in architecture as we move along. So, long story short, by the end of the 7th century BCE, the Medes have become one of the 4 major powers of the ancient Near East. We've talked about the Neo-Babylonians, the Medes. Egypt also retains and remains a major power broker in the region. And also Lydia emerges as a major power, particularly because of its access to gold and electrum. A lot of natural resources in the Anatolian Peninsula, as we've seen as early as the Hittites. But with Lydia, Lydia is particularly known for its wealth in these ancient sources that we look at. A lot of gold, again, and it's credited with the introduction of the first form of coinage. what you can see here is a Lydian gold stater, and this coin has a mark on the back of it. And this mark is a guarantee by the Lydian state that this gold stater is of a uniform weight, and not just a uniform weight, but also a uniform purity. In Lydia, gold, when it's actually brought out of the river, it actually has silver mixed in with it. It's that composite that we talked about, electrum. And this electrum can come in different varieties, more silver and more gold. So the purity varies from region to region in Lydia. This attempt then to standardize weights and standardize the purity for the purposes of allowing trade to take place, to facilitate trade, is a really big shift, right? We've seen rates of exchange. We've seen money in the form of ingots being traded as early as the late Bronze Age. But the shift over to a state-sponsored guarantee, where the state is actually guaranteeing the value of this coinage, is a real big shift. And that concept is known as fiduciary value. It's the introduction of fiduciary value of coinage, that the coin is backed by the state. And that actually ends up leading to other currencies, like fiat currencies, right? Like we have a fiat currency today, right? We trade pieces of paper that are supposedly, well, at one point were backed by gold, but now are no longer backed by gold. They're backed by the authority of the United States of America. So it's a fiat currency. So anyway, this is just one step towards some of the currencies that we use today. And the state-sponsored guarantee is quite interesting. It's also interesting, all the gold coming from this region, one of the Lydian kings of this period is King Croesus. When we talk about being rich as Croesus, this is where that saying comes from. And Croesus was a Lydian king of some renown. He was known to the Greeks through a number of texts and was a rival of the Median Empire. And when the Median Empire was thrown into disarray by the arrival of an upstart named Cyrus, Croesus took the opportunity to expand his empire. He thought, well, Lydia, is doing quite well here on the periphery, but maybe I could use a little bit more land. In order to do this, of course, right, just like the Assyrian kings, just like all the kings that we've seen, you're gonna go to an oracle, and you're gonna want to find out if this is successful, or if this campaign is going to be successful. In this case, instead of consulting the stars like our Neo-Babylonian kings, or engaging in extispacy, Croesus actually travels to Greece, and he travels to an oracle you might know, the famous oracle of Delphi. And what he's told at Delphi after he arrives, again, this is from Herodotus. Herodotus tells us this. He arrives and he says, well, what happens? What's going to happen if I attack Media? And he brings these gifts. And the oracle tells him famously, well, Croesus, if you cross the Halys River, right, the border between Lydia and Media, if you cross that river, a great empire will be destroyed. And so Croesus goes home thinking, oh, this is fantastic. And he ends up striking out against the Median Empire. And he marches his armies to the east, as far as Hattusis, where he encounters a king named Cyrus the Great. Cyrus ends up defeating him eventually, chasing him back over the border and taking Lydia, and the prophecy comes true, right? This is a Greek prophecy. It's going to be ironic, and the great empire that was foretold was not the fall of the Median Empire, but it was actually the fall of Croesus's own empire, the Lydians. So again, this shift that takes place that Croesus tries to take advantage of, this takes place around 559 BCE with the emergence of a Median official